Okay, want to welcome everybody tonight. We're going to be speaking about Galatians 4 and the first 12 verses, and kind of exploring what Paul is talking about, the elementary principles. And this is one that we've gotten into discussions with folks before about what does it mean, and so Paul is going to use another analogy to describe our relationship to the Torah, and then he talks about these elementary principles, and then finally ending up with our relationship with the Creator. So for those there are always some people that call in on telephones, don't have the slides. It's Galatians 4, 1 through 12. Now I am saying, so long as the heir is under age, he is no different from a slave, even though he is the owner of everything. Instead, he is under guardians and managers until the date set by the father. So also, when we were under age, we were subservient to the basic principles of the world. But when the fullness of time came, God sent out his Son, born of a woman and born under law, to free those under law so we might receive adoption as sons. Now, because you are sons, God sent the Ruach of his Son into our hearts, who cries out, Abba, Father. So you're no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, also an heir through God. But at that time, when you did not know God, you served those who by nature are not gods at all. But now you have come to know God, or rather, you have come to be known by God. So how can you turn back again to those weak and worthless principles? Do you want to be enslaved to them all over again? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you that perhaps I have labored over you in vain. I plead with you, brothers and sisters, become like me, for I became like you. You have done me no wrong. All right. If you've ever been around Christian teaching, any at all, you've probably heard it said that Christ redeemed us from the law. And so if he redeemed us from under the law, then why would we ever want to go back into the slavery of the law? Maybe you've heard that kind of thing, and especially when people you tell people that you're in the messianic movement, that well, why would you want to do that? You're putting yourself under that bondage of the law. And if we look at Galatians 4, it seems like Paul is, giving you just read it. It says kind of a rebuke to the Gentile Galatians for keeping biblical festivals. That's what we've heard all of our life. An honest, impartial reading sounds like he rebuked them for observing the days and the months and the seasons and the years, and he warned them not to become enslaved by it again, and that's in the 10th verse there. So this kind of leads us to believe that Paul viewed the celebration of Sabbath and the festivals as kind of a step backwards, backsliding for these Gentile believers. It's kind of a form of enslavement. He said, you observe days, meaning Sabbaths and festivals. He said, you observe months, meaning the new moons and the biblical calendar. And you observe seasons, and that would be like the festival seasons, counting the Omer, days of repentance, days of awe, the various festivals that we have. He says, you observe the years, meaning the sabbatical year of release, the Shemitah, which we just finished off last year. Traditional Christian interpretation teaches that it's unchristian to keep the biblical calendar or honor the Bible's holy days, such as the Sabbath. Now, the Christian tradition now, they see no conflict at all between Galatians 4:10 and the celebration of days, so long as those days are not, Sunday, or the months, as long as it's not a biblical month, or seasons like Lent, Advent, Christmas, Easter, and so on. So it's okay for them to keep all of those calendar different days, but it's not okay for those of us on the Jewish side to keep our days. So they don't see a problem with that. Galatians 4:10 could be understood or it's understood by many to mean that God-fearing Gentile believers are not allowed to have holy days. They can watch the Jewish community do so, but they themselves are barred from participation in the Sabbath and the calendar. So we probably need to go back and review just a minute for that. At the end of last week, we ended up the third chapter of Galatians, and it ended up on the 29th verse. It said, if you belong to Messiah, then you are, and I'm falling down on the job here. If you are, if you belong to Messiah, then you are Abraham's seed, heirs according to the promise. All right. So now if you belong to the Messiah, who is the seed of Abraham, then you are considered the spiritual children of Abraham and the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. So Abraham is the father of many nations, and the believers from the nations become the spiritual seed of Abraham and attain a fellow citizenship with the Jewish people in the greater commonwealth of Israel. Nevertheless, the Gentile believer does not and need not become Jewish, but instead he retains his distinct nationality. The Greek is still a Greek, and not a Jew, and the Jew is still a Jew and not a Greek. Though we are all one in Messiah, yet we're not the same. Therefore, Abraham is called the father of many nations and not the father of one nation. We don't become one nation. We still have many nations. So, and we go on to Paul's analogy here about the slave and the heir, or the heir and the slave. He says, what manner did Paul consider the Gentiles as heirs of the Abrahamic promise? Weren't they all polytheistic pagans before they came to Yeshua? And so Abraham came up with this analogy and tried to explain how the Gentiles related to Abraham. He spoke of the Roman household that which the father of the house had both slaves and children. Now, the father's son is the heir to the entire estate, and slaves included. But he won't come into the inheritance until he's reached an age predetermined by the father. Now, in the Jewish culture of the day, the age of majority was 13. Now, if you think about it, 13, that's pretty scary to say, okay, you've reached your the age of majority, and now you you can come into the inheritance. I just think back to my own days of 13, 14, 15. If you've had kids, you know that that's kind of scary. So a lot of times the father would say, okay, yeah, your age of majority, but you don't come into your own, and you're still going to have advisors and mentors and tutors until such time as the next milestone in the Jewish society was 20 years old. And that was when you were fit for military service. So you'd have a date set up. So as long as you're in this position of being in the minority, meaning you're not of age yet, Paul says you've got what do we call it the last couple of weeks, the pedagogos, and then you have others also. You would have a ward or a guardian of the estate, and this Paul is saying here is how that the Torah and God's word is kind of our guardian. It's what tells us what to do, how to act, and we are subject to that until it says the fullness of time, and then at that point, then we come into the inheritance. So Again, in this parable, Abraham is the father of many nations. He has bequeathed the promises of God to all nations, his spiritual heirs. The heirs, however, did not receive those blessings immediately. They were not yet of the age to inherit. Therefore, they remain subject to a custodianship in the interim. Likewise, the Jewish people were also heirs to the same promise. Paul said, in the same way, we, the Jewish people, also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. Now, there is where we come to what in the world does elementary principles of the world mean? Now, many scholars are not real sure about this, exactly what it meant, and they argue about it. It's amazing when you read some of the different commentaries over this particular verse. I've got several commentaries that you look at, and depending on where they come from in their education, they will differ. The Greek word there for this is stoicheia, and this, it's the word that kind of pops up to me is stoic, but it's not really the word here. Because the stoicheia it could be used at the time that Paul was writing this. It would be used to define a row, a rank, or a line in a military formation. It could also be letters, symbols, or words in a sentence. So the stoicheia are the building blocks that make the whole. The letters, symbols, words that make up the sentence. The squads, the ranks, the platoon, the company that makes up the brigade, that sort of thing. Also, they had theories, or the basic elements of the cosmos was the fire, earth, air, and water. And if you watch the movie The Fifth Element, it's love. Pat reminded me of that. Okay, that's off the notes, by the way.
Well, I know it was true because I saw it in a movie.
There you go. But now, also these elementary principles could mean things that are just contrary to God's principles. And in fact, I've got in my notes later on, if I don't jump over my notes, which I sometimes do. David Stern even called it demonic influences. But let's go back to what the Bible expositors call these different things. Is the elementary principles. One set of scholars are going to call it Paul was talking about Torah and Judaism as the elementary principles, and then other people have said no, he was talking about paganism and idolatry. So let's look at this first one here: the elementary principles equaling Torah. So this is the common teaching in most Christian circles today that Paul was criticizing the Galatians for observing the Shabbat, the Moedim, the new moons, etc. There's a problem with that because that would mean that Yeshua came to redeem his people from following the Torah. Well, we know that's not true because he said that in Matthew 5:17, I didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it, to properly interpret it. And so it says Messiah came to redeem those under the law, meaning those who were Jewish, so that they could no longer be required to keep the law. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So the thought in that with that line of thinking is that Yeshua came to redeem the Jewish people, but we know that what he really did was he came to redeem the Jewish people from sin and death, and not from Torah obligation. But with this interpretation, Paul speaks of the Torah as something weak and worthless. And if you look at the 9th verse, something that he considers on the same level as those that by nature are not gods in the 8th verse. So if we accept that, Paul was talking about if we accept that Paul was talking about the Sabbath and the festivals and the Torah ceremonies, then you have to say, well, that he puts God's holy commandments in a category that he considers no different than idolatry. He refers to the holiness of the Sabbath, the holiness of the festivals, the holiness of the Torah as weak and worthless elementary principles of the world. In other words, Paul considers the Torah as the equivalent of a pagan idol, and he considers Torah observance in Judaism as the same as idol worship. And so that, as you can see, man, that just does not work at all. The only way that would work is if you see Paul as a blasphemer, and it contradicts the Bible, the other apostles, and Yeshua's teaching about the Torah, and it contradicts Paul's own life as an observant Jew. Now, David Stern had some ideas regarding these elementary principles also, and how that applied with the Jewish people. He said in his commentary that the elementary principles included demonic spirits, the things that Paul was talking about. And what was surprising to me to read David Stern's commentaries on and it's in his commentary on the New Testament, and he equated the legalism of the day as a perversion of the law, and it was brought about by demonic spirits. Or the idea of the legalism was satanic or a demonic spirit in his mind. And he said that Jews were also following demon spirits is demonstrated in Ephesians. If you look at that, Ephesians 2 and 3. At that time, you walked in the way of this world in conformity to the ruler of the domain of the air. The meaning that was Hasatan, the devil, the ruler of the spirit who is now operating in the sons of disobedience. So he's talking about their demonic spirits at that point. It says it goes on and says, we too all lived among them in the cravings of our flesh, indulging the desires of the flesh and the mind. By nature, we were children of wrath, just like the others. So it should be noted also that I think that in various sectors of the Second Temple Judaism, there were it was in the first century that they had some ungodly beliefs and ideas, such as the acknowledgement of fate. Now, they used in the Jewish people at the time, the writers and the thinkers, that they used fate as a force in the universe. And Josephus tells us about this, that there were various persons among both the Pharisees and even the Essenes, which I was surprised at, which both believed in fate. And this is a quote from Josephus. This is, now for the Pharisees, they say that some actions, but not all, are the work of fate, and some of them are in our own power, and that they are liable to fate, but are not caused by fate. But the sect of the Essenes affirm that fate governs all things, and that nothing befalls man but what is according to its determination. Sort of like, I guess, the philosophy of predestination in a way. And anyway, that's from the Antiquities of the Jews, 13.172, if you're into references there. So, and the Jewish philosopher Philo, he recognized the function of a stoichia, and this one was a really weird one that I found, that on the breastplate of the high priest. And here's a quote from him. It says, now of the three elements, the stoichon, out of which and in which all the different kinds of things which are perceptible by the outward senses and perishable are formed, namely the air, the water, and the earth. The garment which reached down to the feet in conjunction with the ornaments which were attached to that part of it was about the ankles, have been plainly shown to be appropriate symbols. For as the tunic is one, and as the aforementioned three elements are all one species, since they all have their revolutions and changes beneath the moon, and as to the garment are attached the pomegranates and the flowers, so also in certain manner the earth and the water may be said to be attached to and suspended from the air, and for the air is their chariot. Now that's one of Philo's writings from down in Alexandria where he lived. It's in the Life of Moses 2.121. And so here Philo is saying that the basic elements of the world, which and the pagans believe that same thing, then functioned in the breastplate of the high priest, similar to fate controlling the destinies of people. These basic elements here communicated messages to the high priest of Israel. So you can see there why David Stern could say, there's something that's just not quite right here in how the Jewish people were teaching and their philosophies of the day. So we can go on then if we look at the elementary principles being paganism, then these alternative principles they were a pagan and not Torah or Judaism. And so I think this definition we can pull out of Galatians 4:8 says, formerly when you, the Gentile believers, did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. So in this verse, to me, Paul is obviously speaking about idolatry. The Gentiles in the Roman world were all polytheistic idolaters. They had lots and lots of gods, similar to what the Egyptians had, and they were required by law to participate in the Roman cult and the worship of the emperor. You remember that the emperor was considered a deity, and you were supposed to worship the emperor as a god, and you bow down to him and all that. And actually, they had to, I think it was a yearly basis, had to go to a temple or something and reiterate their allegiance to the emperor as the god of, or as a deity then. So they needed to be part of this approved religious affiliation. And, of course, all of these were idolatrous and they were polytheistic, except the Jews. The Jews were not required to do that. And so Paul has contrasted the Gentile believers' former state, before they came to believe in Yeshua. He's contrasting that former state now with their current state, that they were before enslaved by idols that they worshipped, and now they know the one true God. And I'm just not staying up with these. So anyway, in this context, and let's see, I'll read again this Galatians 4, 9, and 10. But now that you have come to know God, or rather be known by God, how can you turn back to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. And so that was in 9 and 10. So in this context that we're talking about, the elementary principles, meaning paganism, the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world are the idolatrous rituals and religion from which the God-fearing Gentiles had recently come. And so in that case, then the months, days, months, and seasons and years were the Gentile observances that they would become enslaved by once more. Then they would have to follow all of these pagan holidays and celebrations. So, and a thought just came to me that if it just makes so much more sense to me that Paul was talking about paganism here rather than Torah and Judaism, because he's saying, why do you want to go back again into this? Well, they never were into Judaism and Torah before anyway. So how could they go back to something that they were not in to begin with? So that's just a thought that popped up. The God-fearing Galatian believers, of course, they were ex-pagans who they participated in the imperial cult. They worshiped the gods and the emperors. And so this was a part, very important part of their lives. It's kind of like, for us, I mean, everybody has to get a driver's license, a social security card, and so forth. And so that was just part of their daily life. They observed the calendar. It was their civic duty that they did that. And if they didn't do that, then there was a lot of fallout with their family and friends and so forth. And even they could be prosecuted by the authorities if they didn't follow all of these things. So the Romans, they exempted only the Jews. And so the Galatian Gentile believers, they were kind of stuck in the middle. They were in a no man's land here because the Romans didn't really didn't recognize the Galatian believers as Jews, even in some cases, even if they went through with a full conversion and circumcision and so forth, they were not considered a full blooded Jew. And then, like we mentioned last week, even though they may have done that in the synagogue, some of the Jewish people didn't really consider them on a equal footing with those that were born in Judaism. So the God-fearer, as it were, would not be exempt. He would still have to at least make a show of something that he was observing the imperial cult. And so that left they were definitely in a social limbo, not accepted by Judaism and not accepted by the authorities. So you can kind of see their dilemma in what they were trying to do, because they wanted to follow God, and they knew that, okay, the only chance that I'm going to have to get the IRS off of my back is to go through with this conversion and become a Jew. And it may work, it may not work, but if I don't do it, then it's definitely not going to work. So that was the dilemma that they were facing. And so Paul was trying to tell them, no, you don't have to do this. You don't have to try to become Jewish. And the problem with that is that Paul was not addressing their requirements to the Roman government, and he was just talking about the spiritual side of it in regard to going back and trying to be Jewish. And so
politically correct.
Yeah, they were trying to be politically correct. So they were trying to live in both worlds. And so you can see if they'd grown up in the polytheistic world, that the one true God of Israel and Yeshua, well, they could just add him to their list. And so that was the situation that they found themselves. I think what we can do is that we can look at this passage of Scripture, and we can say that Paul was actually addressing this in this regard here to both groups of people in Galatia, the Gentile believers and also the Jewish believers, that he could be talking to them. And I think Paul was maybe calling for a third option here. And that was, he called it an identity in Messiah that completely breaks, apart from those that by nature are not gods. And to me, that those who by nature are not gods, that is the emperor, the concept of the emperor being a god. They're by nature, they're a man, they're not a god. And so, but the Gentiles, the believing Gentiles, had been enslaved by this. By law, they had to follow this thing. And in some cases, they were actually true believers in that pagan, polytheistic the religion. So, and Paul is saying, hey, do you want to go back to that sort of thing again? That's what he's telling them. You don't want to go back into that and to be believing in all that stuff. And we go to that next verse where it's talking about the fullness of time. In Galatians 4:3, it speaks of Israel's enslavement to the same elementary principles of the world, and I think he's not talking about Torah there at all. It's a reference to slavery in Egypt and the subsequent exiles that they were in, because they came out of Egypt, they were enslaved, and then several hundred years they lived. And then the kingdom split, and then there was the northern kingdoms. They were taken away into exile by the Assyrians. And then a few years later, then the southern kingdom was taken away by the Babylonians, who actually the Babylonians had conquered the Assyrians, and so that they just swallowed up all of them. And so that's what he's talking about, because the Bible then addresses that. In Deuteronomy 28:64, it says that Adonai will scatter you among all peoples from the one end of the earth to the other, and there you will serve other gods, wood and stone, that you and your fathers have not known. So basically what is happening, he's saying that God is telling, or Moses actually, God is telling the people through Moses, saying that you're going to be scattered about, and then you're going to come under the influences, these pagan influences of other gods. And we know the track record of the Jewish people when it came to that sort of thing. They did not have a real good track record of staying with the one true God. They just almost seemed like just inevitably they would fall back or fall into some kind of idolatry, so that they would have a God that they could kind of hold in their hands. They had to have something like that. So, but this that was prophesied before, and sure enough, that's the sort of thing that happened. And Paul is saying we don't want to go back to that. Because this messianic redemption, when Yeshua came and lived the sinless life, and then he died, he was the one sacrifice, the one true sacrifice for us all, then that brought an end to that exile. That means that from now on, the people, both the Jew and the Gentile, they don't have to be a part of any of that kind of slavery, because now they are part of God. They are the sons by the Spirit, or they're spiritual sons of Abraham, and then then they become adopted sons, and that allows them to say Abba, Father. And Paul taught that all believers, both Jewish and Gentile believers, have been adopted as sons of Abraham, but also as sons of God. Now, how did this happen? It happens when we place our faith in Yeshua the Messiah, and we bind ourselves to him and his faithfulness. Galatians 4:6 says, "Now because you are sons, God sent the Ruach, his Spirit, the Spirit of his Son, into our hearts, who cries out, Abba, Father." Now, this is the source of the concept of having Jesus in your heart. That's something I've puzzled over sometimes. You think about it. And so why do we say that I'm inviting Jesus into my heart? And that's the way we have it in English. But the concept goes much, much deeper than that. Paul was not talking about the heart as that organ that pumps blood through our body. Now, he's talking about a Hebrew idiom that we're all familiar with, that is the seat of one's intellect, the mind and the brain, and the seat, everything of it, the seat of will and reason. Okay, this is the same thing that we see in the Shema, and the Ve'ahavta says, you shall love the Lord with all your heart and all your mind and your soul and your being. And that these words I command you to this day shall be on your heart. So there again, they're winding up everything that everything that is concerned with your being a person, and everything is concerned with everything, spiritual, physical. And I read one interpretation from the rabbis, the sages were talking about this, and they talked about when it says with your being, they said that God doesn't have your being unless he has your finances too. I thought that was kind of a strange way of looking at it, but you look back into the New Testament, where the rich young ruler came to Yeshua, and he said, what must I do to be saved? And Yeshua tells him, he says, okay, you keep this commandment, that commandment, you honor your father and mother, and you named off the commandments, and the guy says, well, I've done these all of my life. From my youth, I've done all of this. And then Yeshua says, well, then sell everything that you have and give it to the poor and follow me. And he said he couldn't do it. So that, that money, his being was wrapped up in what he had. So,
where you spend your money shows where your heart is.
Sure. That's
what's important to you.
Yeah. You spend your money on things that are important to you, I guess, is what Paul was trying to say. And this is what this rabbi was saying, that if you really are committed to God, then he also has your finances too. So, the commandments are to be in a person's mind, his memory, his thoughts, meditated upon and mentally rehearsed. So our faith in Yeshua as the means, our faith in Yeshua as the Messiah frees us from the slavery of the past and allows us to fully enjoy the inheritance promised to Abraham. And we can now say with confidence that we are sons of God, and that's why we can say, Abba, Father. Now, tonight's takeaway, as it were, the things that I wanted to make sure we remember, is that both the Jew and the Gentile were subject to the slavery of the elementary principles. Maybe they weren't exactly the same for the Jew as they were for the Gentile, but they were both in a slavery to things that were not what God had intended for his people, or his human beings to be part of. The coming of Messiah freed us from that slavery. It's freed us from that particular slavery of the elementary principles, the demonic principles, or the principles of the the pagan way of doing things, and it did not free us from following God's word. because I've heard this so many times, when somebody doesn't want to particularly do something, they'll say, well, I have freedom in Yeshua. I don't really have to do that because I have freedom in Yeshua. And so that's just an excuse for, I'm lazy and I don't want to do it. So, when Paul was talking here about the days, the months, the seasons, and the years, he was referring to a pagan calendar system or a pagan world system. He was not talking about the Torah, because if you did that, you would have drugged the Torah down to the level of pagan idolatry, and Paul never would have done that in a million years, because in fact he said the Torah is good and perfect, and he followed it until he died. And so the last thing was, when we trust and believe in Yeshua, the Messiah, we become sons of God, because we are through Abraham, we're the spiritual sons, and the seed of Abraham was Messiah, and then therefore we become sons of God, children of God, and in that regard we have the right then to refer to the creator of the universe as Abba, Father, Daddy, Papa, however you want to say, a familiar term with the creator of the universe. We have that access because we are now sons of God. And that concludes our study for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it and can take away the idea of the days, months, and seasons and years, and that we are children of God, and that we have a close relationship we can have a close relationship with God the Father. And I wish you all a good week, Shavua Tov, and just stay in the Word, folks. Put a time every day to get into the Bible and pray, and because if you are a child of God, you're going to want to be with Him. So good night, Laila Tov, Shavua Tov.
And if anyone has questions regarding the study and you're not on our internet, so that you can, converse with the notes and so forth, email us with your questions, and
well, you can put it on. It'll be on Facebook, or those of you that have my email. There's a lot of people that listen in on Facebook. That if you'll make a note or a question in Facebook, and I read those things every day, I can pick them up and we'll discuss it, and I can give you an answer for it, and hopefully we'll have an answer, and I won't have to do the Tevye answer where he says, I don't know, tradition. So we'll try to get you a good answer. So at any rate, have a good week, and hope you enjoy the study. We'll see you next week.